They say the worst pain a wolf can feel is the loss of a mate. But they are wrong, because the true agony comes when your mate stands before you, looks into your eyes, and chooses someone else. I learned that under the full moon, with my entire pack watching as my world unraveled piece by piece. My name is Lyra Vale, and on the night that should have marked the beginning of my forever, I was cast aside like I was nothing. The ceremonial grounds were alive with anticipation, torches flickering in a wide circle as wolves gathered to witness the sacred mating rite, a tradition as old as our kind, where fate itself revealed the bonds we were meant to honor. I stood at the center, my heart hammering so violently it felt like it might break free from my chest, my senses heightened as the moon reached its peak, silver light washing over the clearing and igniting something deep within me. Then I felt it, a pulse so strong it stole the air from my lungs, warm and magnetic, wrapping around my soul like it had always belonged there. Mate. The word echoed inside my mind, my wolf stirring with a longing I had never known, and I lifted my gaze, already knowing who I would find. Kale, future alpha of our pack, strong, admired, untouchable in every way that mattered, and in that moment my lips parted, a breathless smile forming as I took a step forward, drawn to him like gravity itself had shifted, my voice trembling but filled with certainty as I whispered, "Mate." But something was wrong. The warmth that should have filled his eyes wasn't there. Instead, there was hesitation, then distance, then something colder that made my stomach drop. He didn't step toward me. He didn't reach for me. He didn't acknowledge me at all. Instead, he turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked past me. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint rustle of the crowd as confusion rippled through them, and I felt my chest tighten as I watched him stop in front of someone else. My sister, Arya. Perfect, beautiful, everything I had always been compared to and found lacking against. Arya, Kale said, his voice steady, certain, like there had never been any doubt, "You're my mate." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. The bond inside me flared violently, as if protesting the claim, twisting into something sharp and unbearable, and I shook my head, my voice breaking as I stumbled forward. "No, that's not possible." I felt it. "You're my..." "Enough, Lyra," he cut in, his tone flat, dismissive, as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience. The finality in his voice struck harder than any blow, and I froze. Every eye in the clearing now fixed on me, waiting, judging, watching me fall apart. Arya looked between us, her expression a mix of shock and something else, something quieter, something almost guilty. But she didn't step away from him. She didn't deny it. She let him pull her closer, let the bond settle between them as if I had never existed at all. The pain that tore through me then was unlike anything I had ever known, a brutal ripping sensation deep in my chest as my wolf howled in anguish, confused and betrayed, unable to understand why the bond we felt was being rejected. My hands trembled at my sides, nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to stand, forced myself not to collapse under the weight of it. "If you're going to do this," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it, "then do it properly." Kale's gaze flicked back to me, irritation flashing across his features. "Don't make a scene." A hollow laugh escaped me, bitter and broken. "A scene? You just tore apart a mate bond in front of the entire pack, and you think I'm the one making a scene?" Murmurs spread through the crowd, but no one stepped forward, no one spoke in my defense. Not my father, who stood rigid at the edge of the circle, his expression unreadable. Not the elders, who watched with cold detachment. Not even Arya, who lowered her gaze but said nothing. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. "Reject me," I demanded, lifting my chin even as tears burned behind my eyes. "Say the words." For a moment, he hesitated, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or the faintest trace of regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "I, Kale, reject you as my mate." The words slammed into me like a physical force, knocking the breath from my lungs as the bond between us shattered completely, the invisible thread snapping with a pain so intense I cried out, dropping to my knees as the world tilted around me. It felt like something inside me had been ripped out, leaving behind a hollow ache that spread through every part of me, my wolf's anguished cries echoing in my mind, as the connection we had recognized only moments before was erased like it had never been. I pressed my hand to my chest, gasping, trying to steady myself as the pain slowly dulled into something heavier, emptier. Around me, the ceremony resumed as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been publicly rejected, as if my world hadn't just collapsed in front of them all. Kale turned away without another glance, his attention fully on Arya now, and the sight of them together, of him choosing her so easily, was the final blow. I pushed myself to my feet, my movements unsteady but determined, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the pity that hung thick in the air. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break any further. Not here. Not in front of them. I walked out of the clearing without looking back, each step heavier than the last, the echo of his rejection ringing in my ears, branding itself into my memory. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, the tears I had been holding back finally fell, silent and relentless, but I didn't stop walking. I couldn't, because I knew, with a clarity that cut deeper than the pain itself, that there was nothing left for me there anymore. The pack that was supposed to be my home had watched me be discarded and said nothing. The man who was supposed to be my mate had chosen my sister without hesitation. And the girl I had been, the one who believed in bonds and fate and belonging, had died in that clearing under the full moon. That night, I didn't just lose my mate. I lost everything. And I swore, as I disappeared into the darkness beyond pack borders, that if I ever returned, it wouldn't be as the broken girl they had rejected. It would be as someone they would never dare to overlook again. They thought rejection would break me, that I would fade into nothing, a forgotten omega swallowed by the wilderness beyond pack lands. But they were wrong, because what they destroyed that night did not leave emptiness behind. It made space for something stronger to take root. The first months after I left were the hardest, not because of hunger or cold, though I endured both, but because of the silence where the bond used to be, a hollow ache that followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of what I had lost and how easily I had been discarded. My wolf was restless, wounded, lashing out at shadows and memories alike, and more than once I wondered if I would survive the fracture of it all, but survival became my only choice. I moved farther from familiar territories, into lands no pack claimed, where rogues ruled by strength alone and weakness was a death sentence. At first, they saw me as easy prey, a lone female, unclaimed, unprotected, but I learned quickly that desperation sharpens instinct. I fought, I bled, I adapted, and somewhere in that brutal, unforgiving existence, I stopped being the girl who had been rejected and started becoming someone new. It began with control, the strange, unstable power inside me, the one my pack had always whispered about, feared, avoided, had never disappeared. It had only been buried beneath my need to belong. Out there, alone, I had nothing left to lose, so I stopped fearing it. I began to listen instead, to feel the way emotions moved around me, how thoughts brushed against my awareness like whispers in the dark, how my presence alone could unsettle or soothe depending on my will. The first time I consciously used it, it terrified me. A rogue had cornered me, larger, stronger, confident in his advantage. But when I reached for that hidden part of myself, something shifted. His aggression faltered, confusion clouding his senses just long enough for me to strike. I didn't just survive that fight, I controlled it. And from that moment on, I knew the truth my pack had refused to see. I was never weak. I had simply never been taught how to wield what I was. Years passed in fragments of battles, long journeys, and quiet nights beneath unfamiliar skies, and slowly, my name began to carry weight in places where names rarely mattered. Not Lyra the rejected, Lyra the survivor. Lyra the one who could turn a fight before it began. It was during one of those journeys that everything changed again. I had crossed into territory I didn't realize was claimed, not by a pack, but by something far greater. The air itself felt different, heavy with authority that pressed against my instincts, warning me I had stepped into something dangerous. I should have turned back. Instead, I kept going. That was how I found him. Or perhaps, how he found me. The Alpha King, Cashin. Even before I saw him, I felt him, an overwhelming presence that dwarfed anything I had ever encountered. Raw power wrapped in control so absolute, it was almost suffocating. When our eyes finally met, I knew instantly that I was standing before someone who could end me without effort. And yet, I didn't look away. "You're far from any territory you belong to," he said, his voice calm but edged with something that demanded truth. I held his gaze, refusing to show the fear coiling in my chest. I don't belong to any territory. Something in that answer caught his attention. I saw it in the slight shift of his expression, the way his eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but in interest. No pack, he asked. No alpha. No one, I replied. I'm not claimed. The words should have made me vulnerable. Instead, they felt like a declaration of freedom. For a long moment, he simply studied me, as if weighing something unseen, and I could feel his power pressing against mine, testing, probing. Most wolves would have submitted instantly under that pressure. I didn't. Not because I wasn't aware of his dominance. I was, but because I had learned something in my years alone. Submission, given out of fear, is not loyalty, and I had no intention of bending for anyone who had not earned it. Interesting, he murmured. What happened next was not what I expected. He didn't challenge me, didn't threaten me, didn't drive me out of his lands. Instead, he offered me a place, not beneath him, not as a servant, but within his ranks. I could use someone like you, he said simply. Someone who doesn't scare easily. I should have refused. I had spent years building my independence, learning to survive without relying on anyone. But something about him, something in the steadiness of his power, the absence of arrogance despite his authority, made me pause. For the first time since I left my pack, I felt something that wasn't tied to pain or survival. Curiosity. So I accepted. Life under the Alpha King was unlike anything I had known. It wasn't easy. Nothing worth having ever is. But it was structured, purposeful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming something more. Cassian didn't treat me like I was fragile or broken. He didn't look at me with pity or doubt. He saw me exactly as I was, and expected me to rise to meet it. And I did. Day by day, I grew stronger, sharper, more certain of myself than I had ever been. The whispers about me changed. No longer the rejected wolf. Now, the king's shadow. His weapon. His equal in ways few understood. And somewhere along the way, something else began to shift between us. It started subtly. A glance held a second too long. A closeness that lingered beyond necessity. The quiet understanding that came from fighting side by side. Then one night, under a sky lit by a familiar silver moon, it happened. The bond snapped into place with a force that stole the breath from my lungs. Mate. The word echoed again, just as it had years ago. But this time, it didn't bring confusion or pain. It brought certainty. Cassian didn't hesitate. His gaze locked onto mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw what it looked like when a mate recognized his bond without doubt, without rejection. There you are, he said quietly. No denial. No turning away. Just acceptance. And in that moment, I realized something that made my chest tighten for an entirely different reason than before. Everything I had lost had led me here. Not to another rejection, but to a bond that chose me back. I never thought I would return to the place that broke me. But life has a way of bringing you full circle. Not to relive the past, but to prove you've outgrown it. The day we crossed into my former pack's territory, the air itself felt different, thick with memories I thought I had buried long ago, yet none of it touched me the way it once would have. I stood beside Cassian, no longer the girl who had walked away shattered under a full moon, but a woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing. Word of the Alpha King's arrival spread quickly, faster than wildfire, and by the time we reached the ceremonial grounds, the very place where my life had unraveled years ago, the entire pack had gathered. They bowed as one when Cassian stepped forward, their submission immediate, instinctual. But their eyes found me. Recognition flickered, followed by disbelief, then something close to fear. Lyra, someone whispered, as though saying my name too loudly might break whatever illusion they thought they were seeing. I didn't react. I simply walked forward, each step steady, controlled, until I stood exactly where I had once fallen to my knees. The memory was still there. I could see it, feel the echo of that pain, but it no longer owned me. Alpha King Cassian. My father's voice broke through the silence as he stepped forward, his posture stiff, his expression strained. This is an unexpected honor. His gaze shifted to me, confusion and unease warring beneath the surface. And, Lyra, we believed you were gone. I said calmly. Just not in the way you hoped. A ripple moved through the crowd, uncomfortable and heavy. Then I saw them. Kale and Arya stood together at the front, exactly where they had been that night, though everything about them felt smaller now, less significant, less untouchable. Kale's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the moment it hit him. The realization of who I had become, of what stood beside me. His jaw tightened, his confidence faltering in a way I had never seen before. "You've returned," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Why?" I held his gaze, searching for any trace of the girl I had once been, the one who had loved him, who had believed in him. But there was nothing left of her here. "To finish something," I replied. Silence fell again, thicker this time. My father stepped forward, his authority slipping as uncertainty crept into his voice. "If there is some grievance, there is no grievance." I cut in, not unkindly, but firmly. "At least, not anymore." That seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. They expected bitterness. They expected revenge. What they didn't expect was indifference. I turned slowly, addressing the pack as a whole, letting my gaze move across faces that had once been familiar, that had once been my home. "Years ago, I stood here and lost everything," I said, my voice carrying easily through the clearing. "Not just a mate, but a place, a family, a sense of belonging." No one interrupted. No one dared. And not one of you spoke. Not one of you questioned what was happening. You watched and decided I was worth nothing. The truth of it settled over them like a weight, visible in the way they shifted, in the guilt that flickered across some faces, the discomfort in others. Cale took a step forward, something desperate creeping into his expression. "Lyra, what happened that night was the best thing that could have happened to me," I said, and this time, there was no hesitation. His words died instantly. Aria's hand tightened around his arm, her eyes wide, searching my face as if trying to understand how I could say that. I met her gaze, and for a brief moment, I saw the sister I had once loved, the one who had laughed with me, shared secrets with me. But that, too, belonged to the past. "You made your choice," I continued, looking back at Cale. "And I made mine. I left." I stepped closer, not in challenge, but in clarity. "What you gave me that night was a rejection. It was freedom." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I turned then, moving back toward Cashin, whose presence remained steady, unwavering, his attention fixed entirely on me. "I didn't come back for revenge," I said, my voice softer now, but no less certain. "I came back to see if there was anything here still worth holding on to." I let my gaze sweep the pack one last time, searching, not for approval, not for belonging, but for truth. And I found my answer easily. There isn't. A quiet inhale moved through the crowd, like the final realization settling in. Cale stepped forward again, urgency breaking through his composure. "Lyra, wait. If this is about the bond, about what I did, I was wrong. I see that now." I paused, not because his words mattered, but because I wanted to be certain of my response. Slowly, I turned back to him. "No," I said quietly. "You weren't wrong." Confusion flickered across his face. "You made the choice that reflected who you were at the time, and I'm grateful for it." His expression shifted from confusion to something closer to regret, but it was too late for that to mean anything. "Because if you hadn't," I added, my gaze steady, "I would have never found what I truly deserved." I stepped back beside Cashin then, and without a word, he extended his hand. I took it without hesitation, the bond between us pulsing strong and sure, nothing like the fragile, painful connection I had once known. "We're leaving," Cashin said simply, his voice carrying the weight of finality that no one dared challenge. As we turned away, Aria's voice called out softly, "Lyra, I'm sorry." I glanced back over my shoulder, meeting her eyes one last time. And for the first time since I returned, I allowed a small, genuine smile to touch my lips. "I hope you're happy," I said. And I meant it. Not because her happiness mattered to me anymore, but because I no longer needed her apology to move forward. Then I turned away for good. As we crossed the borders of the pack that had once been my world, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not loss, not pain, but closure. The past no longer had a hold on me. The girl who had been rejected under the full moon was gone. In her place stood the Luna of the Alpha King, a woman who had walked through betrayal, survived it, and come out stronger on the other side. And as Cashin's hand tightened around mine, steady and certain, I realized the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the life you think you're meant for has to fall apart, so you can step into the one you were always destined to claim.